Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel.
Welcome to another Zeteo Zoom Town Hall. We have an amazing guest with us today. Everyone's talking about Canada and America. Who better to talk to than one of Canada's most outspoken party leaders, Jagmeet Singh, leader of the New Democratic Party, the Progressive Party in Canada. Welcome to our Zeteo Town Hall.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
And Jagmeet, you and I last spoke. I had to go Google it to check. In November 2019, for The Intercept, we did a live event together in Toronto. Feels like
That's
another
right.
world pre-pandemic. It was 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. I remember we just were reminiscing, but yeah, it's been a long time.
And you were then at the time, just for our viewers to be aware, you had become leader 2 years earlier, I believe, in 2017. You were two
That's
years
right. I was a fresh.
in. The New Democratic Party is the third biggest party in Canada. It's the left party. You had just become leader. You're now 7 years in. We're on course for another Canadian election before October of this year legally, but it may be much sooner due to Trudeau's resignation recently. How are you feeling about leading the NDP into another election, your third election, I believe?
Yes, I'm excited about it. I think that this election is a really important opportunity. There's a lot of things going on in the world which are scary, and I think people are feeling worried. And in Canada, there's a big opportunity for us because people feel let down by the governing party, by the Liberal Party. They feel like they don't want to give them another chance. So the choice is going to come down to the Conservatives with Pierre Poilievre or myself. Conservatives have made it clear they want to cut the programs people need, like healthcare, pensions, the things that people really count on. It's going to cost people more. And we've made it clear we want to defend those things and lower people's bills by taking on corporate greed, building homes people can afford, and improving our healthcare system, which we're very proud of, but needs improving. So I think the choice is really clear. For the working class, we're there. For the billionaires, it's the Conservatives.
So I do want to talk about domestic politics and the election. We've got a bunch of questions already coming in. We've got over 100 people in the chat, more people joining. Already got a couple of great questions in the Q&A. If you do have questions, stick your questions in the Q&A. Obviously, I won't be able to get through all of them, but I'll try my best. I'm just going to ask a few of my own, and then I'll bring in some subscriber questions. I got to ask first, Jagmeet, about Donald Trump. I hate to, but I have to. You're going to the polls this year in Canada, and now you have an American president, the shadow of an American president over a Canadian election in a way I don't think you've ever had before in modern Canadian history, where your next door neighbor, the president of the United States, your ally, is saying, Canada, that's a province. That should be the 51st state. And the prime minister of Canada, he's referring to him as governor. I mean, he would say joking, but he's not really joking. Polls show that weirdly, even though a majority of Canadians say they have no interest in joining the United States, I saw a couple of polls, 25% of Canadians say they'd be open to the idea, considering it. And amongst young people, the numbers go up. Amongst 18 to 34-year-old men are much more open to becoming citizens of the United States. What is going on with Canada, America, the 51st state? What was your reaction to Donald Trump's rhetoric?
Well, I mean, it sounds like the musings of an internet troll, not the president of the United States. And I mean, we shouldn't be surprised that the president sounds like that. He is confirmed himself in that status of trolling people instead of really having a serious relationship. We pride ourselves on having a good relationship with our neighbors. In general, Canadians believe you look out for your neighbor, and we've done that. We've built a really strong relationship, a strong economy, but we're proud Canadians, and we'll fight to defend who we are. We've got a healthcare system where you don't go bankrupt if you fall ill. You get the care you need. You could be the child of a CEO or the child of a working class janitor, and you can end up in a world-class children's hospital and get the best care, world-class care, and not have to spend money out of your pocket in Canada. And we're proud of that. And so we are going to defend that. I am worried, though, that there are people that are getting radicalized by the right wing and are losing sense of what we've built in Canada that's special. And it's my job to remind people that we've built really special things, that what Donald Trump wants to do is not going to benefit everyday folks. It's not going to benefit the working class. He's already shown in some of his decisions that the recent tax cut announcement, it's going to benefit those that earn over $300,000. That's not going to help a working class person.
But surely you recognize, even if it's a minority, if a minority of Canadians, the number should really be zero, but if there's 10, 20, 30%, especially among young men, saying, actually, we'd like to be part of the US, that suggests that Canadian politics, the Canadian establishment has failed them.
Well, it certainly suggests that. I think that's concretely true. And I would point out the establishment in Canada, the two parties that have governed in Canada have been the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party. The red and blue teams have governed in Canada, and they failed, absolutely. We're in a position right now where you can earn a decent living and you can't afford a home. We're in a position now where people are having a hard time buying groceries, basic things that you would think, in a developed society, people shouldn't worry about a home and worry about their groceries. But those two fundamental things, shelter and food, people are worried about. So yes, there's been a failure. And that's why we're saying the only way we fix that is by going after the root cause, going after the corporate greed, which drives up the cost of food, going after a housing market that is built for developers and investors, but not built for the working class. That's what we got to fix. And I'm committed to fixing that.
Zain Raza in our Q&A, one of our subscribers says, I think Zeteo should host a national debate for PM candidates when the elections are called in Canada. I wish, Zain, I wish, but I don't think Pierre Poilievre would sign up for that. We'll come back to Pierre in a moment. Andrea says, as a Minnesotan, Jagmeet, would you consider absorbing Minnesota? Most Americans think we're part of Canada anyways.
I've heard some folks saying that, listen, there's a couple of states that might want to actually create something special with Canada. We have folks that believe in universal healthcare, folks that believe that we can do better when we look after one another. That sounds that's very encouraging that people do believe in building a better world. So
there are a lot of Americans who want Canadian healthcare, and actually a lot of Americans who think if you became the 51st state, would that help them get healthcare in the US and the other 50 states? Phil Grauer says, how would so here's an interesting question that Phil has. Jagmeet, even if you say we don't want to be the 51st state, it's a ridiculous idea, you're trolling us. Trump is saying, I'm going to use economic leverage to pressure Canada into joining the US. Tariffs. He's obsessed with tariffs, right? Phil Grauer says, how would a 25% tariff, which is what he has suggested, affect the Canadian economy? What would it mean for cross-border trade, for Canadian businesses? I've seen one study, Jagmeet, that says you could lose 1 million jobs in Canada from a 25%.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it would be massive, massively destructive. And I want to point out, not just for Canada, but for America as well. Our economies are so interconnected. Manufacturing, for example, there are products that start in Canada, cross the border, get further refined in the US, come back to Canada, and go back to the US for final sale. So there are so many people that will be impacted, not just in Canada. It's going to have repercussions and impacts in the States as well. So this is a divisive tactic. And we know that Trump is a bully. In this case, he's an economic bully. And bullies only understand one thing, which is force. And so what we will do is respond in kind. One example that I've said is that there's only really one source of critical minerals for the US, which is sustainable, which is viable, and that's Canada, for many of the critical minerals they need. I've said, let's turn off the tap on critical minerals. They want to threaten a tariff with us. We can go after Elon Musk directly, who's the billionaire buddy of Donald Trump, and he needs those critical minerals for his batteries. So let's go after
cobalt, lithium, that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So I was going to, you preempted my next question, which is, if Prime Minister Jagmeet Singh is in office come October or whatever it is this year, your strategy for protecting Canadians from Donald Trump's threats and a tariff war, a trade war, is not to be his best friend like Pierre Poilievre, but to actually raise the costs for the US.
We got to fight back. And in doing that, we got to keep in mind, we love our neighbors. We want to work together. But Donald Trump doesn't understand cooperation, negotiation. He understands first. The last time we were in a similar situation was when he and his administration imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum. The only way we won that fight was responding with tariffs in kind. And then we were able to get them to back away. So similarly, we've got to respond with strength. Cozying up to Trump does not work. Trying to wine and dine him does not work. Fighting back is the only way. We've got to show strength. And we'll work with our allies. There's governors, there's Congress folks that we can work with. There we can apply pressure and use the diplomacy. But with Trump, we have to use force.
Okay, well, interesting. Phil Grauer, who asked a question, has a follow-up, which I think is good. Could the MAGA movement revive the Canadian right-wing trucker movement that occupied Ottawa last winter?
Well, I'm troubled by the fact that there are even 20% of Canadians that are cozying up to the idea that Trump's putting out. So there is a certain climate that Trump and his kind of right-wing MAGA folks inspire in Canada as well. But still, the hope that I have is 80% of people reject that. So I think it is troubling that he could maybe fan the flames of some of the extreme right-wing folks that are in Canada. My responsibility is to not let folks get divided. I feel fundamentally working class folks, everyday folks have far more in common. We have far more things that are common struggles, common issues, common challenges that we can address together, and we are only able to tackle if we work together. So I really want to find ways to bring people who might think that they're different, who might think that they come from different walks of life, but really are fundamentally working class folks, middle class folks, and say, we're better off when we bind together.
I do want to talk about the domestic politics in the election. Just one more on America. Lovely Pariah is the name of a subscriber in the chat. Says, I'm American-Canadian. The tariffs that have been threatened, what concrete kitchen table examples can I give to my American relatives to explain to them why this would be bad for them and not just Canada and the world?
Okay, I can give them steel and aluminum. So if they apply tariffs on steel and aluminum, Canada is one of the biggest producers of refining aluminum, and many of those aluminum products actually go to the States. So if there's a manufacturing company that requires aluminum products or aluminum pieces, a tool and die company that needs certain pieces made a certain way, we're the ones that will supply that. So a tariff on those will discourage someone from buying them, but then the buyer in America who needs that for their factory to run, who needs that for their products to be produced, won't be able to buy that anymore, or it'll be too expensive to buy it. And so it'll increase the prices for Americans. So a tariff on Canadian goods is going to hurt Canada. Absolutely. It might discourage people from buying our goods, but it also means that it'll be more expensive for folks in America. They may not be able to find the same product or the same quality. It might mean factories get shut down. It will have impacts. The steel and aluminum tariffs, when they were applied last time, actually directly hurt American manufacturing as well and American jobs. So that's one of the leverage points that we said, without even doing anything, it was hurting people in America. And so we don't want to see that happen. We do not want a trade war. We do not want our economies to be hurt in this way. We don't want workers to be impacted in this way. But this will have real impacts. And we have to show Trump that this is not the way to go. This is painful, and it's going to be hurtful to both our economies. We want to protect and build on what we have, not hurt it and harm it.
Amanda Greenwood says, is Canada willing to take any of us in that do not want to live under this authoritarian regime in the US? Amanda, I'm sure Jagmeet will take you guys in when he's Prime Minister. Home to refugees. You supported the Trudeau government from 2022 onwards in what's called a supply and confidence deal, where Canada's a parliamentary system, for those people who aren't aware, who are watching from around the world. It means that Trudeau didn't have a majority. You could have allowed him to govern as a minority government. NDP, as a third party in Parliament, provided the votes to basically prop up that government on issues that you agreed with. You pulled out of that not that long ago. Trudeau obviously has resigned in the recent weeks. Do you regret propping up his government? Do you wish you'd never done that supply and confidence deal?
Yeah, when I think about that, so first of all, I would frame it differently. At the outset, we fought and forced the government to deliver on things, and we used our power and leverage in a minority government. The thing that I think about, the person I think about when I think about what we were able to achieve in these past 2 years, I think about a woman named Sue. Her name is Susan, but she insists I call her Sue. I met her in Ottawa, our capital, at a dentist's office. We had fought for a dental care program, and we were able to win that program. We forced the government to deliver it. And Sue was at the dentist's office. She had invited me to join her. She's a cancer survivor. She's a senior on a fixed income, and she had lost all her teeth because of the treatment that she had to deal with the cancer, the chemotherapy, the radiotherapy. She'd lost almost all her teeth. Her teeth were in really bad shape. She was in the dentist's chair, and she asked the dentist, could you get my smile back? And she had a picture of her beautiful smile. And the dentist looked her in the eyes and said, yes, I'm going to get you your smile back. And she broke down in tears of joy. And then she looked at me and said, it's because of this program that you fought for. And so I think about Sue. 1.2 million people like Sue were able to go to the dentist because of the program we fought for. That's who I did it for. I did it for Sue and the millions of people that are now going to be able to go to a dentist because of our program.
You weren't a fan of it because you ended up pulling out of it.
Well, what happened was we had got the dental care program. We also got a pharmacare program. So to cover people's medications, starting with diabetes medication and devices, we got that legislation passed and money secured for that medication to be covered. We had got as much as we could get done. And it became clear when we wanted to push for more, they were unwilling to go there. Particularly when we said, to make life more affordable, we have to go after corporate greed. The corporate grocery stores ripping off people, the housing market designed for investors and developers, we've got to change that. They were unwilling. So it became clear we could not get more out of this government.
And this government is now looking for a new leader. They've got elections for leadership going on between Chrysler Freeland and Mark Carney as the two frontrunners. Justin Trudeau has announced his resignation. He was on the scene for a very long time, a decade. How will history remember Justin Trudeau in your view?
Well, I mean, I do have to acknowledge we were able to do some really important things together. While I had to force him and I had to push him, I do want to acknowledge that together we were able to achieve a dental care program, which is the first expansion of healthcare in Canada since we brought in our healthcare system. And like I mentioned, millions of people have been able to go to a dentist and use a government dental health card and get that covered and not have to worry about the cost of it. So that's really special. The pharmacare was something that we've been fighting for decades. We were able to achieve that. And the fact that we brought in better protections for workers, these are really important things. And so it'll be a part of our shared legacy that while we forced the Liberals to do things they wouldn't otherwise have done, ultimately the Prime Minister was able to work with me to get these things done, and we were able to achieve them.
You mentioned the things you got out of the deal, like the dental care. What you didn't get, though, was a fully proportional voting system. Mohammed Baig says, why did you not make proportional voting a part of your supply and confidence deal? It would have put the NDP, your party, in a much better position in this coming election.
Well, that is very insightful, and you're absolutely right, it would have. It was actually one of the things we did negotiate when we first sat down to negotiate that supply and confidence agreement. But the Liberals, Justin Trudeau, was firmly against proportional. He said no, and there was no, he had other ideas, but what I thought was the most just, and what we had a parliamentary committee that went around Canada asking for advice on what people wanted, and the consensus was a proportional system was what people wanted, so that each vote would give you the same percentage of power in Parliament. So if you got 10% of the vote, you got 10% of the seats. It makes sense to me as a Democratic Party. I really believe that people's voices should be reflected. He had a flat out no to that, and there was no compromise. And for us, that was the only system that we had any sort of public buy-in and viability for.
And you mentioned he didn't budge on that. Some of his replacements are going to be to the right of him. I think many would argue Mark Carney would end up being to the right of him on the economy. Bill Vogiatsis, sorry, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name, says Ruby Dalla is entering the leadership race. She wants the party to move to the center right. Does this create an opportunity for the NDP to be more progressive? I want you to take that question, but also, regardless of how you pitch yourself in the election, if it is another hung parliament and the Liberals have a chance of forming the government over Poilievre and his right-wing Conservatives, will you entertain the idea of a coalition or another supply and confidence deal?
I appreciate both questions. I'll start with the general kind of lay of the land. We have been really the force in Canada to get the things that people really believe in and need. The healthcare system that we're proud of came in a minority government, similar scenario, where New Democrats had the leverage, had the balance of power, and we brought in that healthcare system. Our old age security, which is a support for our seniors, our pension, even our employment insurance. So when workers lose a job, there's a fund they can go to and it'll give them supports. All of these social safety nets that Canadians are proud of were all New Democrat things, everything that our party brought in historically. So we will always be on the side of working class people. And I am firmly and proudly going to fight for the working class. This is the battle that's in front of us. The Conservatives have made it clear, accepting the endorsement of Elon Musk, that Pierre Poilievre is in the pockets of billionaires. That's who he wants to help. He has made no qualms about it. And right-wing folks often do that. We see the Trump administration already doing it. And so really it's that battle between billionaires and the working class. And so in the next election, I have to be, again, clear about this. I cannot entertain any sort of speculation about the outcome. I'm running to become prime minister. And I have to focus on that goal because Canadians need me to be in that position to make decisions for the working class.
Hold on.
Anyone who wants to work with me, I'm ready.
I'm in the US now, where it's a presidential system. I interviewed Jill Stein. Some of our subscribers got very upset with me because I made the point that you can't be president, which she can't. She was like, I can be president, you can't. All right. In the UK, we had a coalition government when I left the UK to move here in 2015. There was the same debate with the Liberal Democratic Party, as you know, the third party in the UK. Which of the two parties are you going to support? Clearly, I understand you have to say I'm running to be prime minister, but you're in third place in the polls. You're probably not going to be prime minister. And if you enter into a coalition or confidence supply, almost certainly not with the Conservatives. Can you at least rule that out, that you would never support a Poilievre government?
Well, I've said that very clearly. We have nothing in common. There is no way we could work with the Conservative government. You're definitely not going to support the Poilievre government. But what would it take? And there's a question from one of our subscribers, Michael Morkenthau, says, practically, what specific policies would make it worth it to support a Liberal government until October? He's asking about right now. But also, I would ask beyond October, what would make it worth it to support the Liberals in government? Well, I can ask about what policies matter to me, but I cannot, going into an election, entertain anything but trying to win and form government. I can tell you this.
You're ruling out a coalition or a deal with the Conservatives. I just heard you rule it out. But you're not ruling one out with the Liberals. You're not saying I'll never, ever do another confidence supply with the Liberals.
Well, I can tell you this. I frame it in this way. I want to become the next prime minister, the first prime minister that is the Labour prime minister that's working for working class people. And anyone who wants to work with me on my agenda that's going to benefit working class people is welcome to work with me. I'll work with anyone that cares about putting working people first, that cares about fixing our healthcare system, that cares about lowering the price of groceries, taking on corporate greed, putting in a price cap on food essentials, banning big corporations from buying affordable homes, which is happening in the States, or it's happening in Canada massively as well. That's what I can commit to. But in terms of what I could do to continue this government till October, on this point, I've been also very clear. At this point, there is nothing. When Parliament resumes, I will be voting against the government at the next opportunity. It's become clear that we cannot continue. That's correct.
And okay, I understand what you say when you say I want to be prime minister, and you have to say that. But you are in third place. You're polling at 17%. I want to win an Oscar, but I don't think I will win an Oscar. You have more chance of being prime minister, obviously, than I have of winning an Oscar. But I just look at your record. Your critics would say when you became leader of the NDP, they had 44 seats in Parliament. Today, I believe you have 25 seats in Parliament. How do you defend your record over 7 years if the number of seats in Parliament have gone down?
When I became leader, we were at like 10% in the polls. So even though we had previously secured some victories, there has been 2 years that the former leader stayed on, didn't leave, and we were pretty low in the polls. Like I said, 10%. And I took that party from 10%. And now, while you mentioned one that has a 17, there are many that have put us at 20 and 21 and ahead of the Liberal Party, putting us in second place. So we've grown significantly over that time. But ultimately, polls may go up or down. The final poll that matters is going to be in the next election. And in this election, there's a real opportunity. And I want folks to know this. People do feel really let down. Like you mentioned, Justin Trudeau has been in power for almost a decade. And so people are feeling like they want change. They feel let down and they don't want to give that party another chance. So there's only two choices, really. And so I invite people, no matter who you voted for in the past, you might have voted for another party in the past. If you want to reject conservative cuts, if you stand against Pierre Poilievre, who's cozying up to Trump, who's accepted an endorsement from Elon Musk, if you reject that, stand with me this time. And this time, we can fight and win together.
Do you see Pierre Poilievre as a MAGA conservative, as a Trump-like figure for Canada? Aubrey Harris says, I'm frightened at the prospect of a re-elected Doug Ford in Ontario, coupled with a potential Trump-like Pierre Poilievre as Prime Minister. Do you share that view?
I'm deeply concerned about Pierre Poilievre, and I'm concerned about him for specific policies that he's been really open about. He's made it clear that he wants to cut healthcare. Healthcare is something Canadians really believe in. He wants to privatize it. He wants for-profit healthcare in Canada, which is the exact opposite of what we believe in. We believe you should be able to go and get care and not have to worry about how much it costs you. He wants it to be pay for access to healthcare, which is really problematic. He wants to cut pensions for seniors. And this is something that seniors have really raised as a concern. Seniors in Canada get a combination of a Canadian pension and an old age security, which gives them some basic amount of money so they can survive. It's not enough, actually, as it is. It can range between $1,200 to $1,600 a month. And at one point, it was decent. Now it's barely enough to get by. He wants to cut that even further. That's going to cost seniors. We just were able to, as a part of our agreement, we were able to secure childcare as a law of the land. And so for many families, they're able to access $10 a day childcare. And Mehdi, I don't know if you know the going rates of childcare. It can be thousands of dollars a month. We've got it down to $10 a day for many families. He wants to cut that as well. Cutting that could mean thousands of dollars more a family has to spend. It could mean that many women won't actually be able to go back to the workforce. So his cuts are serious, and that's what I'm worried about. And that he's leaning into a pro-billionaire, a pro-Trump type of rhetoric. That's also very troubling.
You mentioned his spending cuts. I just want to put in a question that we had about that, if I can find it again. Give me 1 second. We've got a lot of questions in the comments.
This is great. Well, I just appreciate the opportunity.
Here we go. Well, we appreciate you taking the questions. Ali Abdul Hamid says one of the main criticisms of the NDP and Liberal parties more generally is that increased government spending is both inflationary and increases deficits and debts. How would you deal with the contrasting priorities of fiscal discipline with spending on what's desperately needed, like healthcare?
Well, I think I'm going to take this question very seriously. We do need to spend within our means. Actually, the first leader of our party, Tommy Douglas, who the Canadian listeners will know is one of the most famous Canadians. He brought in healthcare. He actually was very prudent.
Grandfather, isn't he? He's Kiefer Sutherland.
That's right. That's right. That's the connection. Very, very, very well done. Yeah. So he was an icon. He was actually voted as the greatest Canadian ever. He's the first leader of our party. I've got a picture of him in my office. He actually, in Saskatchewan, where he was first the premier, he first balanced the budgets to make sure that we were fiscally responsible, and then brought in universal Medicare in that province. And then when he was elected, brought it in across the country. So we believe, and our roots are, we've got to be prudent with our money. The things that I would cut would be some of the waste. We give billions of dollars in subsidies to highly profitable oil and gas companies. I would end that. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars on outside consultants when our public service, the federal employees, could do that work. So I would cut those contracts. There's things that I would cut. But there's places where I would invest. I believe in investing in healthcare. I believe we could invest better in education. I believe we could do a better job in investing in taking care of our seniors. So I would make investments strategically for working people, and I would cut the wasteful things that liberals and conservatives have spent billions of dollars on for so long. I think it's harmful when conservatives talk about cutting the things that we need just to give more money to their billionaire buddies. That's no way to build an economy.
Beryl Pilkington, you mentioned oil and gas companies, says climate breakdown is the biggest threat to the world, burning fossil fuels. What will the NDP do to address the challenges such as wildfires, floods, drought, and so on?
Well, twofold. One, we have to do our part to reduce emissions. Bluntly, we've got to bring down our emissions. And secondly, we now live in a reality where climate change has become the norm. So what we would call extreme weather has become normal, that extreme weather happens. And given that, we've got to make investments to build better and more resilient communities. Many communities that face floods or fires could have prevented the brunt of those damages if they were able to make investments to improve their infrastructure. So having better water management systems in place to prevent the flooding from happening, having better forest management systems in place to prevent the worst impacts of the forest fires. So this is something, an existential threat. I got 2 daughters. I think about the future planet I want to leave to them. So we've got to fight the climate crisis, and we've got to build more resilient communities. I would say those twofold approach.
Thank you. Moza Al-Talabi says, I love your approach to so much, Jagmeet, but your lack of fight when Quebec pushed their bill to forbid religious symbols, like your turban, in government troubles me. How can we believe you will put up the good fight for Canada when you didn't do that for yourself against a racist bill?
Oh, I said that the bill is absolutely discriminatory. In fact, it happened in my first leadership campaign. And every day of the campaign, when I went to Quebec, I was asked questions on it, and I called out the discriminatory nature of that bill. And it probably hurt my numbers in Quebec, but I didn't back down from it. I never said I accepted it. I never said it was okay. I always said it was wrong. I think we need to challenge it. It's being challenged in court right now, and it's going to make it to the Supreme Court of Canada. It is a discriminatory bill, and it says basically based on your articles of faith, you cannot hold certain jobs in the province of Quebec. I think it's wrong. I think it's discriminatory, and I'll continue to oppose it.
You mentioned I do want to ask about Gaza. A lot of questions in the comments about your foreign policy position. Before I get there, one last domestic politics question. You talked about you're not able to say what your conditions would be for a deal and coalition, but practical question from Afzal Habib, Canadian voter, says, what would you say to me? People, Canadians like myself, will be voting in upcoming elections in districts where NDP candidates are unlikely to win. They're trailing significantly, but Liberal candidates have a chance to beat the Conservatives and Poilievre. Should we be doing, he says, hashtag strategic voting, or tactical voting, as we call it in the UK?
Yeah, well, I would say in this election, we're in a very unique scenario. In this election, we've seen again and again, people are telling us that they feel really let down by the Liberals. People are telling me this. And it's normal that after a period of time, people feel let down by the current government. So a decade in, 2, 3 mandates in, people feel let down, and they're not going to give the Liberals another chance. So I would say this time very specifically, it's one of those moments where I ask people to stand with me this time. It doesn't matter who you voted for in the past. It doesn't matter where things look right now in the polls. Ultimately, Canadians are not going to give the Liberals another chance anymore. And so it really is a choice between the Conservatives who want to cut or New Democrats who want to fight back. I'm the only one that can fight Pierre Poilievre. The Liberals can't do it anymore. The Liberal Party is not able to do it anymore. They just no longer have the steam. I am ready to fight back. And if you want to fight back against them, I invite you to join me.
So a lot of questions in the chat. I can't take all of them, but I'm going to try and sum up some of them about your position on Gaza. Obviously, Canada has been pretty supportive of Israel since October the 7th during this genocide in Gaza. You actually used the word genocide on the parliamentary floor last May. You called for Canada to invoke an arms embargo on weapon sales to Israel. Do you believe that the Canadian government, if you're saying it's a genocide in Gaza, which most Western politicians won't say, but you've said it's a genocide in Gaza, does that mean that Canada, your government, Justin Trudeau, is complicit in genocide?
There is no question that Canada has not done enough and has been complicit in what's going on in the horrible conflict. And let's be really clear, this has been a war that has killed innocent children, innocent women, families, the heartbreak, just the sheer horror. We saw the images. It was televised and telecast live. People saw the horror of the violence that was perpetrated against the people of Gaza. It is heartbreaking. Anyone who has a heart, any human can look at that and say it is wrong. And the fact that how wrong it was, how horrible it was allowed to go on for so long with so little opposition is also really demoralizing and heartbreaking as well. And I take no pride in the fact that I tried to do what was right. I stood up and said early on, within a couple of days after, when no one was willing to say this, I said, we need a ceasefire. This has to stop. I called
your
Canada.
Prime Minister started saying ceasefire and then stopped famously mid-sentence. He said seize and then switched to...
That's right. So we put pressure on the Prime Minister to change his position, and it took months and months, and finally he changed. We said we need an arms embargo. We said beyond that, we need accountability. We said that there needs to be war crimes and a prosecution against those that are culpable in committing war crimes. We wanted sanctions, severe sanctions, specifically on Netanyahu and every single one of his war cabinet for the war crimes that allegedly I think will be proven, but for the actions that they committed. The arms embargo is a minor thing that Canada could do to say, listen, we're not going to send weapons we're not going to sell weapons to a country that is engaged in activity that is so heinous. And so I've taken these positions, I stand by them, but it really in a lot of ways feels not enough given how horrible what happened, how many lives were lost. We will continue to maintain our position in defense of human rights and unequivocal about that.
I'll come back to your party's position, but Rachel Forseth says, I appreciate you highlighting Canada, Mehdi. Well, thank you for being a subscriber. I'm excited to vote for Jagmeet. I'm sure Jagmeet's delighted to hear that. She asked, why do you think the Liberals have pushed against speaking out on the genocide in Palestine?
You know, I don't know why. I mean, it became so clear, and it took so long for them to even support finally the position of a ceasefire, which would seem to be very obvious. Why would you not want to support an idea of ending violence and ending the deaths and ending the loss of life and the horror happening? So I can't understand it. I can't understand why the Liberals took the position they took. We were able to force a vote in Parliament calling on a number of steps to be taken, and that vote passed in Parliament. And it called on the embargo, called on sanctions against the war cabinet. It called for very specific measures. They voted in favor of it, and that motion was the will of Parliament, and then they failed to act on it. And so I don't understand why they would vote one way and still not act on it.
And of course, Pierre Poilievre, who is the favorite right now to be the next Prime Minister of Canada, the Conservatives, sounds like he's even way more pro-Israel than Justin Trudeau has talked about, even being hawkish on Iran. Reagan Bellin says, Jagmeet, as someone who's been very upset with the Canadian government's complicity in the siege on Palestine, some of the moments where I've been most hopeful have been seeing NDP MPs like Heather McPherson advocate fiercely in Parliament for a ceasefire and an end to occupation. How would an NDP government change course on Canada's current foreign policy positions? And Shabina Khatri adds, you've previously advocated for recognizing a Palestinian state. Would you do that as Prime Minister?
Yes, I would do that as Prime Minister, absolutely. I think the only solution for long-term peace is statehood and ensuring that people can govern themselves in peace and security. And also, I believe absolutely that people of Israel should be able to live in peace and security. And the only way to achieve that is to ensure that both people have the right to govern themselves and to live in peace and harmony. So I absolutely support that position. We'll maintain that. And I forgot the first part of the question, actually.
It was about just generally Middle East foreign policy positions and how.
Oh, yes. How we would change I mean, we would follow through on the things that we forced Parliament to vote on, and we're able to secure the support of Parliament, and then it didn't happen. So we would enforce an arms embargo, frankly, on any country that violates human rights. We said that similarly that Saudi Arabia, given their human rights violations, should not receive, we should end the sale of arms and weapons that were going to Saudi Arabia. Canada has a number of contracts with Saudi Arabia. We would be very principled in our human rights. Canada actually used to have this reputation across the world as being a country that was unequivocal on the side of peace, diplomacy, and promoting that. And for some time has lost that respect on the global stage. So we restore that, which I think is very much in our tradition. It's very much in our history, in our past. We were a country that took these really strong stances in the past. I would take those again.
One subscriber asks, what about relations with India? India and Canada have had rocky relationship lately. How would you take that relationship forward as Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India, continues to crack down on minorities, Muslims, Sikhs, and even apparently targeting international critics, members of the Sikh community in Canada, of course?
Yeah, I've been really critical about the Modi government. Similarly, when I talk about our neighborhood, our being strong neighbors with Americans, I love that relationship. I think the same thing applies to India. We've got incredible people that come from South Asia to call Canada home, many of them from India, and that's a beautiful thing. And I want to maintain those relationships. But it's clear that the government in India, particularly the Modi government, is a autocratic, is a violent government. It is one that abuses minorities, and I want to continue to call that out. We want to have a relationship with countries based on the foundation of basic respect for human rights. And that means you cannot abuse minority groups because of the religion. You cannot abuse critics that call out the abuse that's going on. You can't target journalists and academics the way the Modi government's doing. I think it has to be a relationship that's built on a foundation of human rights, respect for the dignity of life, and to do otherwise would be an insult to our tradition of defending human rights.
And we're just wrapping up, but I do want to take this question, go back to domestic policy. A lot of people are asking about housing, so I feel I should ask. Bill Vogia, how would you approach housing in Canada? I live in Toronto, where it's largely unaffordable. Would an NDP government invest in housing, not just give tax breaks to private companies? And David Dole asks, on the relatedly, have you put any thought into advocating for social housing with the kinds of investments seen in a place like Austria, where Vienna consistently ranks as the most livable city? Renters pay a fraction there of what they do in other major cities.
Yeah, housing is when I said the two major things that I hear from Canadians are grocery prices and housing. And when they talk about housing, they talk about a home. And so what we need to do for homes in Canada is really all of the above. So what so far the approach has been is to incentivize builders by giving them a tax break. That is not enough on its own. We need to build more homes with private development, sure, but that's not a solution on its own. We need cooperative housing. We used to build homes where everyone in the building, everyone in the apartment were owners of that building. That is something that we can do again. We need not-for-profit housing, housing that's built and maintained not for the purpose of returning the biggest investment to these shareholders, but the purpose of it is not for profit. The purpose is to keep the building in good repair and keep the rent as low as possible. So building not-for-profit housing. We need to find ways for the government to directly invest in building homes again. And we did that after the post-World War period, where many hundreds of thousands of homes were built by the government at incredibly affordable rates. We need to do that again. And the sheer scale of that will bring down the cost of housing. We need all of these options. And finally, fundamentally, the housing market in Canada works for rich developers and investors. You can make lots of money in the housing market, but it does not work for the working class. We need to shift that. And one of the laws that I would bring in to change that would be to ban big corporate landlords from buying up the affordable homes that exist. They are doing that across the board. It used to be 0% the ownership by corporate landlords. Now 1 in 5 rentals are owned by a large corporate landlord. That has to change.
Last question, and we've had so many questions. I apologize to our subscribers. I haven't been able to answer all of them. Although we have asked, I believe, 24 questions. So Jagmeet Singh is not like a lot of politicians who gives long-winded answers. We managed to zoom through these. We're out of time. I'm going to give the last question. I think it's a fascinating one to Ben Curtis, who says, what has the NDP learned from the outcome of the US election? Which I think is fascinating. He points out that the Democrats didn't shift on Gaza. They tried to shift to the right on immigration issues. When you look across at your neighbors in the US, you look here what happened to the Democrats, to Kamala Harris. What lessons are you taking from that as you get ready for the election in Canada?
Well, first of all, we're absolutely taking lessons from that. I got to learn wherever I can so that we can be in the best position possible. What I heard, and I think one of the most compelling examples of what's going on in the States was when I saw a compilation of AOC and Trump voters. They went through and asked people who they voted for, and they said, I voted for AOC. Why? Oh, she's awesome. She's got my back. She's going to fight for me. Who'd you vote for president? Trump. Why? He's going to lower my bills. And it became clear to me that people did not see all of his crimes, all of his horrible ideas, all of the horrible things he said. They fundamentally believe that he would make their life more affordable. And so we can't dismiss the fact that right now workers in Canada similarly cannot afford to get by. That Canadian dream, like the American dream, is no longer there. People do not feel like you can get a good job and find a home that you can afford and pay your bills and buy your groceries. We've got to address that directly. And so that's going to be my focus. Fundamentally, working people in Canada need to know that with a new Democratic government, one good job should help you buy a home, should help you should be able to buy your groceries, you should be able to live a good life, save for the future. And I'm going to really focus on that because that is what working class people deserve. I believe in that. I know how much that is something that is no longer, it doesn't feel attainable. So we're really going to focus on the things that matter most to working people.
Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel.